got a Monday car chat going here again. I always enjoy these things. I put together some stuff for you today that's some of you might find interesting. You know, some of these old timers would probably really enjoy it. And let me get my chair adjusted here. But first I'm going to start off by solving the mystery of the old car riddle. This thing actually is a 1927 Buick Master 6 convertible coupe. If you freeze that and you look at that real close, you can tell that that car is exactly the kind of car this one is. Everything, even the three bars on the bumper, is the same. And it's all, you know, the covered spare, the Landau bar, the little visor here, and all that. That's exactly what car that is, and it's even got that little cargo compartment back there. It's a 1927 Buick Master 6 convertible coupe. Pretty darn cool. And this one here was not the kind of picture you usually see of an old car like that because it's parked in the mud and there's a dog standing in front of it. That tag, if you could read it close enough, is a Kentucky tag, but that picture was taken in Tennessee. Anyway, vacuum schematics were a lot of fun back in the day, and whenever the line mechanics at the shop where I was working got done putting an engine in, they would give me the vehicle to straighten all the vacuum lines out. And I would have to go by these schematics, and I'd have to have me a roll of vacuum tube in there and all that, and the vacuum check valves and all this, and you'd have to be able to sort out what all these things were, so you'd make sure the air cleaner diverter, by the way, you know, the little snorkel on the air cleaner that had the little door that would close whenever it was cold and pull warm air off the manifold stove. And that one right there had a couple of canisters on it. But this is a 1984 Ford with a carburetor. Now, when they had a carburetor on it, that thing looked like a road map of Clarksburg. Some of them looked worse than this, like if it was on a 5.8 in a pickup truck. Now, you might notice whenever they went to the central fuel injection, or what you might call TBI, they basically didn't have as many vacuum lines. The reason they had so many vacuum lines was because of emissions controls, and occasionally when they hit about 60,000 miles, some changes need to be made because of the age of the car, and we would have these recall program sort of things that we'd have on like escorts and stuff, and we would have to repipe a bunch of this and put some vacuum check valves in various places and all of that, and it was just a humdinger of a job to have to do all that. But anyway, we'd have to be able to go by that, you know, these little vacuum control valves. Look at that, 1, 2, 3 of those, and it's got 2 purge control valves because that one's got 2 canisters on it, and that's a vacuum check valve. There's your PCV, there's EGR, gives you manifold vacuum port right there, and then so on and so forth. You know, that right there is the they had a heat riser. You remember what the heat riser was for? It would let hot air come across under the carburetor around where the fuel was going through there for early fuel evaporation. That's what General Motors called it, EFE, early fuel evaporation. Some of the Escorts had a little grid under the carburetor that was a heater. And so that thing would kick in whenever it was cold. It would keep that fuel from condensing quite so much whenever it hit that cold metal because they wanted nice vaporized fuel going in there to burn. Well, anyway, whenever they got to the point to where they had fuel injection, they didn't need as many vacuum lines. You're basically going to the EGR vacuum regulator right here, and you're going to the EGR. From there, you know, you had coming off this. Also, in the carburetors, there was this ported vacuum that would only have vacuum when you would give it a little bit of gas. And sometimes on the old Chevys back in the mid-70s, when I would be horsing around with the vacuum lines on those, they had the distributor vacuum advance connected directly to manifold vacuum, and you know what manifold vacuum does. Whenever you get on it, it would actually retard the timing a little bit, and I think they were doing that to try to prevent pinging, labor knock or something. Never really understood why they had manifold vacuum connected to the distributor vacuum advance. It made no sense to me, and so I would take a little T and I would come off of the ported vacuum port on the carburetor that was going to the purge valve or EGR and all that hogwash. I would tee into that, and I would run that to the vacuum advance, and that would make an astonishing difference on the way that car took off. And every time I would do one like that, the customer was always super, super happy with that. Anyway, there's your air cleaner diverter, and that one's got a little cold weather modulator that was in the breather. And then there was also the bimetal. So there's this plastic thing, there was this bimetal strip in the breather, and that was basically where that air cleaner diverter got its stuff. There's your canister, the vacuum restrictor right there is what you're seeing here. There's your AC adapter and PCV valve, manifold vacuum going to the map sensor. Real simple, basically, not nearly as much trouble as this. All right, look at GM. All right, now the GM emission hose routing on a carburetor, it's an 85 model with a carburetor. You know, you basically had thermal vacuum switches on that too. There's your little vacuum motor, and there that little bimetal thing in the air cleaner that was supposed to, whenever the air going in there was hot enough, it would begin to close this a little bit. You know, that's a thermostatic air cleaner, we called it on that. And a lot of times those things would be totally shot, but a lot of times when I was at the dealer, I would actually replace those things because you could get them and replace them, and it would make a difference on some of them on how they did when they were cold. And there's your carbon canister and your tank pressure control valve to the fuel tank, your PCV valve. You see on this one here, if you know what some of this stuff is, you know, purge thermal vacuum switch, early fuel evaporation thermal vacuum switch. See that EFE I was talking about? Then you got a check valve here, air management valve. You know how the air management system, you were supposed to, when you were letting off, it would vent all of that air from the air pump. Because if you didn't do that, if that air went into the exhaust, it would cause it to backfire, or it'd cause it to go pop, 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 pop out the exhaust. Because they would have, when you would have all of that, when you had a centrally, you know, fuel delivery system like a carburetor or even TBI, it would basically cause some of the fuel to condense on the inside of the manifold, and then when you let off and that vacuum, you know, your vacuum went up, that would vaporize that fuel and it would go down through the exhaust, and if there was fresh air being delivered down there, when that all that hot gasoline laden air was in there, it would go pop, 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 pop. I had a Carmen Ghia that had megaphone tailpipes on it, and I used to switch it off going down the road and turn it back on. It looked like two shotguns shooting out the back because you fill the exhaust up with that. The thing about it is, on some of these vehicles, if you do that, it'll blow the muffler up. You know, I've kind of seen it do that. This is an 89 with TBI. See how they simplified it, just like they did on the Ford. And this one here never was, even on 85. This wasn't quite so bad as those Fords were. But this one right here was a little simpler than this. All right, now this was Dodge. This is what Dodge did. You see, you got pretty much all the same parts: heated air diaphragm, EGR valve. You got your coolant cold switch closed. This one right here, these little thermal vacuum switches would let air go through based on the temperature of that little bulb in the bottom. Then you get your little air pump down there, and you know this one here actually shows you the two valve covers, and that's the breather cap, because the PCV valve would pull air through the crankcase and it would get the air that it was pulling through there. And then you got a solenoid. Then the distributors up here, so you're seeing a vacuum advance, and see how that line's going to there. Anyway, just throw you some of that stuff out there. There's vapor canister right there. All right, so this one here was that's a 1985 D50, and this right here is an 89 with TBI. Now look at that. Dodge vacuum schematics were probably more complicated after they went with TBI than they were when they were carbureted. At least, this is sort of an apples and an orange, because that's a D150 and that's a D50. So this was basically a four-cylinder. No, I'm sorry, that was a D150. I apologize, because it's got two valve covers. I knew better than that. But it was just like I think that was may have been a two-barrel carburetor on that one. It's hard to say. I know that one just got two injectors and a throttle body. But anyway, yeah, boy, I sure bombed on that one. I was talking about two valve covers, and I was talking about it being a D50, which would be a four-cylinder. Duh. All right, this is vacuum schematics on a Toyota 75 to 80. Notice how they stayed the same for 5 years. On the OEM domestics, they wound up moving. They changed from year to year, model to model, and everything, and from engine to engine. It would just be totally different. Ain't no way you could catalog all of those darn things without a lot of trouble. But with 95, let's go forward 15 years, 95 with EFI, look at all those vacuum lines. We got a whole bunch of them. Some of those Hondas used to have so many vacuum lines on them in the late 80s, it was doggone scary even looking at it, like Honda Accords and stuff. They'd have, you know, looked to me like a mile of vacuum line on it. All these vacuum lines going over here. And if you didn't know how to hook all of that up, you know, you'd be in a big mess. But if they had this on here, you could figure it out. You know, there's your EGR vacuum modulator and EGR valve, which is peculiar to some of these Asian cars. There's your canister, and this one here says with air conditioner, data link connector for ignition timing setting, you know, so on and so forth. You'd have to jump it and all that. Okay, freezing a coolant leak in a flash photo was always fun to me because I was always writing these magazine articles and I always wanted to make an interesting picture. This right here was a freeze plug, or expansion plug, if you want to call it that, that's leaking. And whenever I had it, I said, okay, pressure that up. And I got under there with my flash and I got that thing making a beautiful little spray of water shooting out of that expansion plug. This was the strangest thing I'd seen. If you've been to my Technical Rider Facebook page, you might have seen this as my header photo. And what happened on this one, we were doing some other work on this. It seemed to me like we were doing an oil change. And I noticed there was an awful lot of coolant in this area right here. This is the water pump. And that water pump developed a crack right here for some strange reason that I have no idea about. And when I did the pressure test on it, and that stuff squirted out like it did, I said, man, I got to get me a picture of that. And so I got down there with my flash camera ready, and whenever they put the pressure to it and it shot that out, I took a picture of it. A beautiful little shot of that water squirting out of the crack on the top. That was like a 95 Windstar or something like that with a 3.8 in it. And I thought that was really cool. Now this right here, farm truck woes, this one guy that I knew really well, he called me and he says, can you take, he had a 91 F-150 that had probably 60,000 miles or 30,000 miles, I can't remember, but I think he only had 30,000 miles on it, but he used it out in the field a lot and everything. And he says, I need a 30,000 mile service. Can you take my truck to the Ford place and do a 30,000 mile service on it? This was a four-wheel drive truck. And you know all the stuff that Ford wants to do on a truck on a 30,000 mile service. And this guy had plenty of money, but he didn't like getting off of it, you know. This is the same guy that I told you came in knocking on my door at on one Sunday morning about 6 o'clock and wanted me to go start his irrigation engine for him. And I charged him $20 and he got ticked off. Well, anyway, I took his vehicle to the Ford dealer. I was working down there. I wrote it up, 30,000 mile service, whatever it calls for. And so the thing was about, the coolant was way down in the radiator for some reason, but we didn't see any leaks anywhere. And so we went ahead and put all that in there. You know, the engine looked fairly clean. It wasn't all that filthy dirty like you'd kind of expect it to. But we got through with it, and all of the bearings that had to be packed and everything that had to be done. I mean, it was a by the book 30,000 mile service on that 91 F-150 with 30,000 miles on it, or 32 or whatever it had. He just wanted that done because the truck was a relatively new truck, and it was $550. Well, you know, go to the dealership and you're getting a 30,000 mile service done on a four-wheel drive pickup. Expect it to be high. Well, when he got it back, he noticed that when he was driving it, it was trying to overheat sometimes. And he said, it wasn't doing that before y'all did this work. Well, when we took it back over there, this wasn't his truck, but it looked just like this, except worse. When we pulled the condenser away from and you couldn't see this when the truck was put together. When we pulled it back, there was so much of them dog fennel fuzzies in there that it caused this truck to overheat. All we needed to do to get the truck not to run hot was clean the radiator out. And I'm talking about externally clean it, because it was absolutely filthy. And he was ticked off though, because it cost more than he thought. It's kind of funny. Him and his, I've known the guy all my life, you know. He passed away now. But anyway, I went in there and I said, here's the bill. This is all we did. He goes, just tell me how much it is. I said, $550. He says, you're kidding me. And he was really throwing a fit, and his wife just got the checkbook, wrote the check, and handed it to me. But anyway, I took it back to the Ford place. This is boring photos like you see about worn out brakes. These worn out brakes, how people just drive them until they, you know, are in such horrible shape like that. That one there wore out until it just came apart. You know, like the rings of Saturn there, what you're looking at there. And, you know, you can, everybody's seen stuff. If you've been doing work on vehicles very long, you've seen cars that come in with brakes that were just horribly worn out like that. This 4.3 liter jumped time because this little guide here that was bolted in between the chain had worn out to the point, because the chain had so much slack in it, it wore that thing out. And when it wore it off, one side of this, that's turned around backwards. If you turn it around this way, these things are sticking out like this. One of those fell off and went down in there and traveled all the way around that gear. and it caused it to jump time, you know, and we basically got that, put a timing chain on that one. That was like the doggone 85 model. It was really, really, really high mileage. And one time there was this guy that I knew that had a 70 model Ford XL with a 390 in it. He couldn't drive it because he didn't have a title for it, and he had come to Texas from South Carolina and all that kind of stuff, or North Carolina. And so I told him I would buy the whole car from him for $25. I mean, this is a ragged old car. I mean, seriously ragged. But I needed the engine that was in it because I was going to rebuild it and put it in this guy's pickup truck that was wanting a motor. He wanted to go from a 360 to a 390 or something like that. That's not true, because the 360 was a Dodge. One way or another, I can't remember what the deal was, but I do know that I wanted to put that motor in a pickup truck. And so I bought the car from him for 25 bucks. Now, you got to remember, this is over 40 years ago, so I forget things. But I noticed when I revved it up, cranked it up, revved it up, and it sounded amazingly good to, you know, have all the miles and wear that it had on it. When I took that thing apart, that timing chain was so loose, all the plastic was gone off that aluminum timing gear. They had the plastic lining on it when it was new. I could take the timing chain off with my fingers without taking the gear off. I mean, that's how loose that timing chain was. This one here was pretty loose too. Now, if the timing chain gets loose enough, you'll have a low engine vacuum and you'll have a low power and that kind of stuff. I've actually seen that on a Dodge. These gear setups that you can get for some of the engines are pretty cool. Those gears have got to be really tight so they don't have any lash, or it'll be really, really noisy with all that bouncing of them gears whenever that camshaft is basically hard and easy and hard and easy, and it causes a tremendous amount of noise on those kind of gears like that. That's not a bad idea though, because see, this right here, this is going to turn these gears. If this one's turning this way, it's going to turn those gears that way, and that's going to turn this gear the right way it's supposed to go. Works pretty good. That's a, you know, hot rod thing and all that. Now, you notice on them, that timing mark, on the timing marks that you would have on some of these motors, like on a Ford and a Chevrolet, if you were using the chain like this, the Ford, these timing marks went together when you was putting it in. On a Chevy, they both went straight up. I always thought that was kind of interesting. All right, when the wire harness is no longer available, this is my buddy Donnie, we would have to go in there and cut the sheath off of that harness and work on the darn thing. I mean, it was rough. And there was that one that you might remember me telling you about, where he told this guy that he needed to bring it back because it kept blowing the air conditioner compressor clutch fuse, and the guy didn't come back when he was supposed to come back because he had taken a piece of 12 Romex wire, bent it into a U, and just crammed it down there where the fuse went. And when he did that, he melted down the wire harness, and it was on like an 06 or an 08 model Malibu. Wire harness was no longer available. And so Donnie had his own shop by that time, he still does. And he says, you know, I can fix this, but you're going to pay me what it costs for me to do it, and it may take me 8 hours to fix that wire harness. And that means you're going to pay me my hourly rate, which, you know, if you're the shop owner, the hourly rate's a pretty good bit. Anyway, it was going to be such a huge amount of money. This guy drove his wire harness burned up car without air conditioning and many other functions because he didn't want to get off the money to for Donnie to redo that. Now, I had this other little story here that I told a while back. This waitress had one of these Buick Specials that had that little V6 in it, and she told me the engine had caught fire, and that her parents had bought her a ignition coil and a distributor cap and some plug wires for it, but they didn't have anybody to put it on there. Well, the rest of the wire harness, well, not much to it, was burned up too. And what I had learned was you can unplug that wire harness from the firewall and every other place and lay it out, and you can basically replace each wire one at a time. As long as you only replace one wire at a time, you're not going to get confused and hook it up backwards. And I did that, and I got that car started for it. It ran really good. But that was a wire harness thing. I think I just charged her $25, but it didn't take me about an hour to do it because the car was so easy to work on, you know. Those old V6s that they had in those Buick Specials. This is David and his $1,500 crankshaft. That was on his Facebook page. I thought that was so funny. And I asked him about that. That's why he was one. He said, that was a $1,500 crankshaft. This guy right here is a gearhead like you wouldn't believe. And he's a good mechanic too. But he was one of my students at the college. You might even remember, if you go on my YouTube channel and you pull up Buck's phone call, you got about a 45-second video of him talking on the phone about what he's going to do with his Camaro to trick everybody out. The purpose of this resistor, this was on a Jeep Cherokee, an older one like 87 to 90, and that resistor was there to slow the fuel pump down so it wouldn't be so noisy, believe it or not. That's what that resistor was for. The ignition system on this was the new kind of ignition that didn't need a ballast resistor. Okay, now whenever I would take a fuel pump, if I had a problem with the fuel pressure on one of these older early 80s Fords, I recognized the fact that they had, coming off of the starter solenoid, they had a wire coming from here that was supposed to put full voltage to the fuel pump through the inertia switch while you were spinning it over. But after you let off, then it had a resistor wire, 1.3 ohms, and that would slow the fuel pump down, so you would, for some strange reason, they thought people wouldn't want to hear that fuel pump going wee in the tank, although you usually couldn't hear it anyway. But they did away with this. What was so peculiar about it was my shop foreman, and I found out that I could actually modify the wiring very easily, and I'll tell you in a second how I did it, by just moving that little, you know, the two terminals, the little rubber terminals that you stick on those bolt-looking terminals on the starter relay on a Ford. One of them basically went to the fuel pump. Well, if you took that one, it was, here's how it was wired up. It had one of these solenoids, or if they didn't have them nuts on them, you just stick that little L-shaped rubber terminal with a metal sleeve in it down on there, and that's how you hooked it up. Now, one of these would trigger the solenoid, and while the solenoid was triggered, the other one would get 12 volts delivered out from it, and that's what they were doing to bypass this resistor wire. All right, so what I would do is I would take the wire that was going to that small terminal, and then I would put a lug on it, and I would put it on the positive battery terminal that was coming to this from the battery, which, you know, there's basically your starter relay. So I would take this terminal right here that was only hot when you had the starter energized, and I would move it to this terminal right here. So I would take it loose from here, and let's say this is the one that was coming from the battery, I would put it here, and that would give full voltage to the fuel pump all the time. And because these resistor wires tend to get tired and get more resistance when they get older, that just didn't work good. Well, the shop foreman saw me doing that, and I told him what I was doing, and he was all PO'd about it and ticked off and said, "You're making dangerous situations, and we may get sued, and blah, blah, blah." Well, I went and got a brand new fuel pump out of the parts room because I knew about it, and the brand new fuel pump had a piece of paper in it that said to do exactly what I was doing, because they were factoring in the fact that this silly 1.3 ohm resistor wire was not going to do. There's your fuel pump relay down there, see. So if this right here was always hot, it would always be bypassing that wire and running full voltage of the pump all the time, instead of only sending it to it when the starter relay was energized. That's why I took this terminal and moved it here, so it would always have power. Now, notice it would only have power going to the fuel pump if the fuel pump relay was energized, so I wasn't running the pump all the time, and it was a good repair. Now, on your starters, like this one right here, you might have noticed they have an S terminal, and I don't know why that one is marked R, but a lot of the times it'd be an S terminal and it was marked I over here. This one energizes, slaps these two terminals together so that battery voltage goes into the starter. This one over here sends power out to bypass the ballast resistor going to the ignition coil. And this is kind of the way that worked. Now I drew this little schematic. You got your points and condenser here. You got your coil here. Secondary ignition spark's going to come out that way. All right, and then you got this ballast resistor here. So you turn on, if you didn't have that ballast resistor there, it would burn these points up eventually. So that ballast resistor needed to be there because this is points in a distributor. This is just spinning distributor that's going to open and close those contact points. I drew this just a few minutes ago. All right, and so whenever you like I usually, you know, you're gonna turn it all the way to start. I just drew this like this because it's two separate switches within the same switch. You turn on the ignition, that starter trigger works. All right, see that, what it did? You got this energized, you got that energized while you're spinning the starter, and basically it would cause this right here to, see how the starter relay would throw both of those over there, and it would send 12 volts directly to the coil, bypassing this. That's how that used to work. And so the fuel pump, I thought it was very interesting, they wired the fuel pump up the same way. Now this resistor is necessary, the one on the fuel pump was not. Okay, so I'm going to back up here again. Alright, you can see that. Alright, let me back up again and see that, how what it looked like. I basically did an animation I shouldn't have done on that slide. Anyway, alright, so the essential air tools. We used this one right here whenever we were pulling the injectors out of a 5.4 liter 3 valve. You know, them aggravating injectors that if you pull them out slow they come apart and you got to use a special tool to get them out. We jerked them out with this thing, $350 Ingersoll Rand. This little Chicago pneumatic stubby right here is really good if you're working down in there where you're trying to get a harmonic balancer off and you ain't got room for your regular big impact ring. I kept these in my office, and whenever somebody had a specific job that they needed, I would let them use one of them. Alright, now always make sure you check the orifice whenever you're doing air conditioner work, particularly if the compressor has died, you know, you need to replace this. You'll see them looking like that. The little orifice is supposed to be replaced every time you do anything on an AC anyway. And these are different colors. You need to make sure you're using the one that's the right color. So that, you know, get the right one for the thing. You know, not that it's going to make a barrel of difference anyway. Farm trucks used to get really dusty, and this little vent solenoid had this little cover on it, and it would get clogged up with this crud, and whenever it would throw codes because it couldn't vent, and it would suck a little bit of water vacuum on the tank that wouldn't bleed off because of all this crud in here. And it was, what they wound up doing was they wound up taking this hose right here and running it to a little air filter that was supposed to stop this from happening. And you'll see it, a hose coming off here going somewhere on the frame. There'll be a little box, you know, that's an air filter or something like that. It was pretty slick. This was on some of the Fords. We saw a lot of these, and these canisters, they get clogged up with dust too. And it was just a big mess. And so that's why that vent wound up, you know, being sent to through a filter. All right, that's a crummy picture of that spark plug, but you can see how it was completely worn out and had all these valve stem seal deposits on it and all that. I always, when I pull one of those out there, I know when I put a new plug back in there, it's going to do really well. About them there ad creators. Whoever it was that created this ad didn't have the foggiest idea what they were talking about. They take these patches, I saw this somewhere, I thought it was hilarious, and they put it here on the outside of the tire. Duh, you know, how long is that going to stay there? It just, that's silly. You know, you're going to pay $17 for 200 patches, and you're going to stick them on that. Well, yeah, whatever. Anyway, I just want to see that. Now, this little funny story here, this is a little small toolbox. You can tell about what size it is. And I got sitting up here, and it's got my ASC certified 25 years on it. And it was a Master Tech Gold Tool Award for Daimler Chrysler. One of the older mechanics, whenever he looked in the little catalog about what he was going to get for a Gold Tool Award, if he finished all of those little tests they'd bring you, send you in them little booklets, and the shop foreman would say you completed them. They'd give you gold-plated channel lock pliers, or one time I got 3 gold-plated wrenches, a 7/16, a ½ inch, and whatever, or a 3/8, 7/16, and a ½ inch. I didn't even keep those things in the little display pouch. I just threw them in my toolbox, and they were snap-on wrenches, you know. But this toolbox here was only about this big. It's a little bitty thing. You can tell the size of my safety glasses laying up there. It's ridiculous. All right, and so there's all this other stuff I just had thrown up in there. Includes some of my business cards and all. But the point is, this guy thought he was going to get a full-size toolbox, and it was really comical to see that he thought that, because it looked like a full-size toolbox in the picture, and he thought he was going to get a big old toolbox. But I told him, I said, Bobby, that's not a very big toolbox. It's only about this big. And boy, he was really put out about that. This is a good tool if you got $1,700 to pay for it, but if you want one that's got a carbon pile where you can turn the knob, it's kind of hard to get a tool like this nowadays. battery load test. You can actually turn the knob, load it, and watch its voltage go up, you know, amperage go up and the voltage go down and all that kind of stuff. I had one of these. This one here was the one that I bought when I set that program up in that little town up the road where I launched the program from scratch. And at the time that I got this one, it's made by Autometer. You can look it up. BVA 34. Pretty darn cool. And it works good, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, there's not a stand that it comes with, but you know, you can actually build you a stand or put it on a bench or whatever. And anyway, everybody needs a pickup sooner or later. This is what pickups were made for, is hauling stuff. And when I see a truck like that is being used like it's supposed to be, I really get, you know, it gives you a little bit of country pride to see somebody using a truck, because that's what that truck was designed to do. Although a lot of people just use them for a ride, you know. This car right here, I saw this on it was on Facebook. I didn't take his picture. I saw it somewhere. And the question, the meme was, what is he buying? You know, this thing is a Chrysler, like a 77 Chrysler. It's just falling apart. These were some of the ones like I used to work on back in the day when they were new. But that thing, look at that. Look at that negative camber there. You know, it's just horrible. And this should be sitting in the tall grass, but it still runs and the guy still drives it, even with all the problem it's got. It's really something how somebody can keep one running, isn't it? And this one never made it to the tall grass, or if it did, you wouldn't know it by looking at it. That is a fine-looking old Pontiac right there, like a 68 model or whatever. All right, this one right here, this guy's trying to keep his out of the tall grass. I took that picture because I saw the guy working on it, and I thought that was pretty cool. I just enlarged the picture. That's why it looks so pixely and everything, but I took a picture with my phone without half thinking about it on the way by. But you see somebody working on their vehicle, it makes you wonder what they're trying to fix, what's wrong with the vehicle and all that. Some people are just trying to keep it together. You know, they just have one that's been rear-ended and they just tape it up and they put plastic on it and they just do whatever they can to keep it going. And they'll drive that thing for many miles like that, you know. I used to poke fun at Chevy lovers by making ads like this. That truck right there sat in the grass until the grass grew up around it. You couldn't tell it was a truck there. And it was like a 2000 model or 2001 Chevy or something. I was astonished that that farmer parked it there next to his house and never drove it again. Why? I don't know. I always wonder about stuff like that. But I put this little like a rock thing. I got nothing against Chevys. I just like to poke fun at the people that think that's all you need to be driving. And that pretty well finishes us up today. I really appreciate you guys listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the video. And we will talk to you next time.